What if Stannis Baratheon legitimized Jon Snow and wed him to Val? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The battle is done before the sun reaches its peak. The wildling host that has spent weeks massing beyond the wall breaks against Stannis' cavalry in less than an hour, driven into the snow and the tree line and the frozen mud of the open ground south of Castle Black. The dead are everywhere. The living ones kneel. Mance Rayder, king beyond the wall, stands with chains on his wrists and says nothing when they bring him through the gate. Inside, the war room is cold in the way that stone rooms always are after too many men have filed through them. Stannis stands at the table with his hands at his back, looking at the map. He does not look like a man who has just won a battle. He looks like a man adding numbers that will not balance. Jon Snow is across the room when Stannis first takes stock of him. The Lord Commander is 17, dark-haired, with grey eyes and a face that gives nothing away. He is talking in a low voice to one of the surviving watch officers, and he listens more than he speaks, which Stannis notices. He also notices the direwolf sitting at the young man's feet like a white shadow, watching the room with red eyes. Jon Snow is young, and he is a bastard, and he commands the loyalty of men old enough to be his father. Stannis files that away. Val is brought in with the other captives. She is not chained the way Mance is. She stands straight and watches the Southron king with the kind of look that does not bother to hide its contempt. Stannis looks at her for a moment, then looks back at the map. That evening, he summons Jon Snow to his quarters alone. Jon comes. He leaves the direwolf outside and stands across the table from the king, the same way he stood across the war room, still waiting, giving nothing away until he knows what is being asked of him. Stannis does not waste time on pleasantries. "The free folk are leaderless," he says. "Mance Rayder's captivity ends that. 90-odd tribes with no one to hold them together will splinter or scatter north again. And in a year you will have the same problem. You know this." Jon says he knows it. "The Watch cannot hold this wall indefinitely, not against what is coming." Stannis says this the way he says most things, flat without dramatics, which somehow makes it worse. The free folk are not your enemy. They never were. They were running from the same thing you will be running from, and they have men who can fight. He lets that sit for a moment. "I am offering you legitimization," Stannis says. "Jon Baratheon, trueborn, by royal decree, and with it a marriage. Val, Mance Rayder's daughter, to bind the free folk to you and to your name. They will not follow a southern lord. They may follow one of their own blood joined to a man they have seen fight." Jon is quiet for a moment. Outside, a gust moves against the wall, and the torches shift. "I am Lord Commander," he says. "You will resign the commandership. I need a lord, not a watchman." Jon looks at him. "You're asking me to break my vows. I'm asking you to choose which vow matters more," Stannis says. "The one you swore to a dying institution, or the one you owe to the living." He does not say it cruelly. He says it the way a man lays down a piece on a board. "This is the position. You may examine it." Jon asks for time. Stannis grants him until morning and says nothing further. Mance's life is not mentioned, but it hangs in the room anyway, the way a debt does. Sam finds him in the yard an hour later. The cold is hard, and the yard is mostly empty, and Ghost is there, which means Jon is there, and Sam has known that trick since their first ranging. Sam's face, when Jon tells him, is not hard to read. It never is. "They'll fracture," Sam says. "The Watch, half of them already resent you, and this will give Thorne everything he needs to—" "I know." "Jon." Sam stops. He tries again. "You swore. We both swore. You can't just—" "I know what I swore." Jon looks at the wall. The top of it catches the last of the dying light, and the ice is almost gold for a moment. I also know what's beyond it. Sam is quiet. He has been beyond the wall. He knows what is beyond it, too. He's not wrong about the wildlings, Jon says, almost to himself. Scattered, they're nothing. Together, behind the wall, with men to feed them and organize them, they're 10,000 fighters we don't have to face from the other side. He shakes his head. And the cold is coming, Sam. It is coming, and we have nothing. Sam does not argue further, but he does not look convinced either, and Jon can see the worry on him, the way you can see weather coming across an open field. In Stannis' quarters, Melisandre stands close to the brazier and watches the flames, while Davos Seaworth says what he always says when Stannis is about to do something that will cost him allies. The Northern Lords will not like it, Davos says. He is calm about it. He is almost always calm, which Stannis respects, even when it irritates him. A bastard legitimized is still a bastard in most men's eyes, and wedding him to a wildling girl. The Northern Lords are not here, Stannis says. Rose Bolton holds the north for the Lannisters, and Walder Frey holds the twins for himself. The Northern Lords I need are the ones who hate both of them, and those men will want a Stark name in the fight before they follow anyone. Jon Snow is not a Stark. He is the next best thing. Stannis turns from the window. His mother was Ned Stark's blood. Every man in the north knows he was raised at Winterfell. A Baratheon name with Stark associations and free folk loyalty is worth more than any lord I could dispatch to broker alliances for the next year while the dead walk closer. Davos says nothing more. He does not agree, but he knows when the decision is made. Melisandre speaks then, from across the room, without turning from the fire. The Lord of Light did not bring you here to save the Watch, she says. He brought you here for him. The fire showed me. It has shown me since the first night your fleet turned north. She pauses. The boy is the key. Not to your throne. To something larger. Stannis' jaw tightens slightly at the theology, the way it always does. He believes in the Red God's power. He has seen too much not to, but he chafes at being told what his own decisions mean in someone else's prophecy. Still, he does not dismiss it. The wall rises above them all in the dark, 700 feet of old, cold ice, and somewhere in the middle of it, Jon Snow is staring north and making up his mind. He goes back to Stannis before morning. The king is awake when Jon arrives, standing at the same table with the same map, and Jon wonders if he slept at all, or if this is simply how Stannis Baratheon exists, upright, studying, waiting for the next problem to present itself. Jon tells him he will accept. He says it plainly, without conditions attached, because he has spent the night working through every condition he might have made, and finding each one smaller than the thing it was meant to protect. His oath to the Watch matters. It matters less than the dead things massing beyond the wall. That is the sum of it, and he is done pretending otherwise. Stannis nods once. He tells Jon to be in the great hall by the second bell. The ceremony is not elaborate. Stannis is not a man for elaborate, and Jon would not have wanted it if he were. By the second bell, Davos Seaworth stands to one side of the king with a document already drafted and sealed, and Melisandre stands to the other side saying nothing, watching Jon with those red eyes that always seem to be measuring something he cannot see. Sam is there because Jon asked him to be, though Sam stands with his arms folded and the look on his face of a man attending a funeral who has not yet decided whose. A handful of free folk captains are present, hard men with scarred faces who watch the Southron kings the way wolves watch fire wary and unblinking. Stannis reads the declaration aloud in the flat voice he uses for everything, legal and plain, and the words settle into the cold hall like stones into water. Jon Snow, bastard, is declared Jon Baratheon, true-born, by the authority of Stannis of the House Baratheon, first of his name, rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. The Free Folk captains say nothing. Sam says nothing. Davos affixes his own name to the document as witness, then passes the quill to Melisandre, who signs without being asked. Jon signs last. His hand does not shake. He watches his own name change on the parchment and feels something close to grief, though he cannot say clearly what he is grieving. Val is brought in after. She comes without chains, because Stannis is not a fool. You do not present a wildling bride in chains if you want her people to respect the union. 2 of his soldiers flank her but do not touch her, and Val walks between them with her chin up and her pale eyes already scanning the room for whatever she is about to be told to accept. She looks at Jon first, then at Stannis, then she understands. Stannis lays it out for her without softening it. Her father is a prisoner. Her people are leaderless. The Snows are coming, and with them something worse than snow, and the only future in which the free folk survive as a people, rather than scattered fugitives or corpse soldiers, is one where they are bound to a wall with men willing to defend it. Jon Snow, Jon Baratheon now, fought beside them. He led the defense of Castle Black. The Free Folk captains know his name and his sword. The marriage is the seal on a compact her people need, and she is the price of it, and Stannis does not insult her by calling it anything other than what it is. Val is quiet for a long moment. She looks at Jon. "You agreed to this," she says. "I did." She looks back at Stannis. There is something in her face that is not fear and not acceptance, something colder than either. A woman calculating survival with the same efficiency Stannis calculates troop movements. She has been calculating it since her father's banners broke and fell, since the chains went onto Mance's wrists, since the Southron King's cavalry rode through the Free Folk host like a blade through fog. In the end, she says yes, because there is no version of no that ends better for anyone she loves. The ceremony that follows is 2 ceremonies stitched together. A septon from Stannis's retinue speaks the formal words, because Stannis is not a man to forgo legality, even at the edge of the world. Then Tormund Giantsbane, freed briefly from custody and watched by 6 of Stannis's men, performs the wildling rite. Blood from Jon's palm, blood from Val's, pressed together while Tormund speaks words in the old tongue that the Southron men do not understand. Jon understands enough. Val understands all of it. She watches Tormund through the whole of it, with something that might be gratitude or might be the opposite. And when it is done, she does not pull her hand back immediately. When the ceremony ends and the small gathering disperses, the news moves through Castle Black the way all news does in a confined garrison, instantly, in every direction at once, and growing darker with each telling. Bowen Marsh hears it in the yard. He stands very still when he is told, and his face goes through several things before it settles on nothing. Sir Alliser Thorne hears it at the armory, and is not still at all. He argues with the man who brings him the news as if the man is responsible for it, and then he goes somewhere private to be furious, where Stannis's soldiers cannot observe him being furious. The Watch brothers who served under Jon during the wildling attack accept it with the dull exhaustion of men who have been surprised too many times to be surprised anymore. The ones who never accepted Jon's command in the first place find each other in corridors and speak quietly. Stannis's presence blunts all of it. Whatever Bowen Marsh and Alliser Thorne are calculating, they are calculating it with an army of 1,500 camped inside and around Castle Black, and the math does not favour action. Not yet. They wait and watch and file the grievance away, and Jon knows they are doing it, and there is nothing he can do about that, except give them no immediate opportunity. That night he sits with parchment and a candle that gutters every time the wind finds the gap under the door, and he writes to Robb. He writes it 3 times before he has a version he would let a raven carry. The first 2 tell too much about the doubt. The third is honest without being uncertain, which is a harder balance to find than it sounds. He explains the legitimization. He explains Val and the marriage, and the free folk warriors who will ride south under Baratheon, and Stark colours, both if Robb will recognize them. He does not ask for Robb's blessing exactly, because asking for blessings implies the possibility of refusal, and he cannot afford to frame it as refusal being possible. He asks instead for Robb's partnership. He tells his brother that the thing beyond the wall is not a story men tell to frighten children, and that the time for every house to protect its own corner is running out. He seals it and hands it to the steward before he can write a 4th version. Ghost settles at his feet as the candle burns low. Jon puts his hand on the direwolf's neck and looks at the far wall and thinks about the name on the parchment he signed this morning, Jon Baratheon. It does not feel like his name. He is not sure anything has ever felt entirely like his name. Somewhere in the castle, Val is in the room they have given her. He does not know what she is thinking. He suspects it is not unlike what he is thinking, except colder, and without any illusions he might still be holding. The raven flies south before dawn. The raven reaches Winterfell in 4 days. Robb reads the letter twice, standing at the Lord's table in the great hall, with the grey light coming through the high windows, and Bran watching him from across the room. He reads it a 2nd time, not because the words are unclear, but because he needs a moment before he speaks, and reading gives him that moment without it looking like he needs it. Bran waits. He has gotten good at waiting. Jon's been legitimized, Robb says. He sets the letter down. By Stannis. Bran takes that in. He asks what it means for the North. Robb doesn't answer immediately. He picks the letter up again, looks at the part about Val and the Free Folk warriors, sets it down a 2nd time. It means my brother is now Jon Baratheon, he says, and it means Stannis is coming south. The lords are summoned that afternoon. They come to the hall in 1s and 2s, shaking snow from their cloaks, and Robb reads them enough of the letter to let them understand the shape of it. The room divides the way rooms always divide, along lines that were already there before anyone walked in. Great Jon Umber slams his fist on the table, not in anger, in something closer to satisfaction. A bastard who fights like that earns his name, he says, and wildlings with spears are wildlings with spears. I don't much care whose banner they march under if they're marching the right direction. Lord Karstark says less, but nods while Umber speaks, which is its own kind of endorsement. The Bolton men in the room say nothing at all, which is a different kind of answer. Robb sees it. He was always better at reading a room than people gave him credit for. When the hall empties, he sits alone for a while with the letter and a cup of wine he doesn't drink. What Jon is asking for is simple enough in its logic. What it costs is harder to count. Stannis Baratheon legitimizing a Stark-raised bastard is not a gift. It is a move on a board, and Robb knows enough now, after the twins, after everything, to look hard at any man's gifts before he picks them up. But Jon is his brother. That is not nothing. That has never been nothing. He writes back that evening. He tells Jon the marriage is accepted as a fact, and the Free Folk alliance is accepted as a necessity. He does not promise Stannis his fealty. He does not promise his banners. He tells Jon to come south when he can, and that Winterfell's gates are open to him. He seals it and sends it north and goes to bed and lies awake for a long time in the dark. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea of politics that separates the north from the capital, a different letter arrives in King's Landing. Cersei reads it standing. She reads it the way she reads all intelligence that threatens her, very still, very fast, and then again slowly, while her mind is already 3 moves ahead of her eyes. When she finishes the second reading, she sets the parchment on the table in her solar and looks out the window at the city below and breathes. Jon Snow legitimized. A bastard watch-brother made a lord. A wildling girl made his wife. 10,000 savages potentially bound to a Baratheon claimant's cause. She turns this over and examines each face of it. Stannis is not clever enough to have thought of this alone, she says, to no one in particular. Qyburn is in the corner, which is close enough to no one. Someone counselled him. Qyburn offers that Davos Seaworth is known to be practical. Cersei dismisses this. Seaworth is a smuggler playing at lord. This has Melisandre in it somewhere. The Red Woman's fingerprints are always on the things that should not be possible. She does not say this aloud. She files it. What she says aloud is this: the realm cannot know a legitimized bastard has the Watch's sympathy and the Free Folk's numbers and a Stark name in all but blood. The realm must know instead that Jon Snow is an oath-breaker who abandoned the Watch for a wildling bed and a king's bribe. That the Free Folk are savages who have raided northern villages for generations. That Stannis is a desperate man inventing legitimacy because he has none of his own. She instructs her agents before nightfall. Ravens go north to the lords whose loyalty she still holds or rents. Letters go to the citadel. A carefully worded account of Jon Snow's desertion of his post is dispatched to every master in the north who might read it aloud to a lord at supper. She is not panicking. Cersei Lannister doesn't panic. But her eyes are bright when she seals the last letter, and her hands move fast. Back at Castle Black, the preparations take the better part of a week. Stannis moves with the efficiency of a man who has been planning the next step since before the current one finished. Supply wagons are loaded. The Free Folk captains, those who have accepted the compact, organize their people into something that resembles columns, which for wildlings is a considerable achievement. Tormund does most of the actual organizing, because the captains will listen to Tormund in ways they will not listen to Stannis' officers, and Stannis is pragmatic enough to use whatever tool is sharpest. Mance Rayder stays in his cell. This is understood by everyone without being stated. He is the anchor that keeps the Free Folk from drifting, the weight on the other end of the rope. Tormund knows it. Val knows it. Jon knows it, and does not like knowing it. But he doesn't argue the point with Stannis, because he has no argument that holds. Jon finds Sam on the last morning, in the yard near the armory where Sam goes when he wants to think without being disturbed. Ghost is already there, which again means Jon knew where to look. Sam has his arms folded against the cold. He looks at Jon with the expression he has been wearing all week, worried past the point where it shows plainly, which on Sam's face means it shows very plainly. "You don't have to stay," Jon tells him. "I know I don't have to." Sam shifts his weight. "That's not the question." Jon waits. "The question is whether any of this works," Sam says, "whether Robb accepts it, whether the Free Folk hold together, whether Stannis actually he stops." He looks at Ghost instead of Jon for a moment. "Whether you're safe." Jon almost smiles. I have a direwolf and a Valyrian steel sword and 10,000 wildlings who need me alive. That's not the same as safe. It isn't, and they both know it. Jon grips Sam's arm once, firmly, the way you grip a thing you are not sure you will hold again. Sam grips back. Val is in the yard when Jon turns from the armory. She is standing near the column of free folk gathering at the gate, watching the preparations with those pale eyes that don't give much away. She has said little to Jon in the days since the ceremony. Not hostile, something more considered than hostility, as if she is still deciding what he is to her and has not finished deciding. He stands beside her and looks at the same column she is looking at. They'll follow, she says, after a moment. For now is enough, he tells her. She glances at him. She doesn't agree or disagree. She looks back at the column. The gates of Castle Black open, and the army moves south into the grey morning Stannis at its head, Jon and Val riding behind him, Ghost a white shape moving at the column's edge. The wall rises behind them and keeps rising until the tree line takes it, and then there is only the road and the cold and whatever comes next. The gift is empty country, and the column moves through it like a long grey wound across the snow. 3 days south of Castle Black, the trees thicken and the road narrows, and Stannis' outriders ride with crossbows across their saddles, because no one fully trusts what the gift might be hiding this season. The Free Folk column stretches a mile behind the cavalry, women and children among the fighters, because the wildlings do not march the way Southron armies march. They move as a people, or they do not move at all. Jon rides in the middle, not at the head with Stannis, and not at the rear with Tormund's warband. In the middle, which is where a man ends up when he does not know which direction he belongs. He is not Lord Commander out here. Bowen Marsh holds that name now in Castle Black's corridors, at least in practice, and Jon's watch brothers are staying at the wall doing what the watch does without him, and the fact that their Lord Commander has left them to do it is a thing Jon has not finished reckoning with. The cold helps. The cold keeps everything simple. Put one foot in front of the other, and breathe, and the cold takes the rest. Ghost ranges ahead and doubles back and ranges ahead again, a white shape at the tree line that the free folk watch without fear. They know the direwolf. A few of the children have started calling him by name. On the 4th evening, Val falls in beside him without ceremony, which is how she does most things. She has spent the day riding with a group of northern scouts who came south from Stannis' outrider line to observe the wildling column, and the scouts look different for it. Looser somehow, less certain that the free folk are simply savages wearing cloaks. Whatever Val said to them or showed them during those hours, it worked in ways Jon's political arguments about alliance never quite manage. The one called Harwick, she says, nodding toward the scouts ahead. He has a sister taken by Thenns 3 years ago. He wanted to know if she was alive. Jon looks at her. Is she? I don't know. But I told him what clan she was taken by and which settlements they wintered in. She rides a moment without speaking. That's enough for him to find out. That's all they need. Something real. Jon lets that settle. He does not disagree. Stannis summons him that night, and the king's tent is what it always is, a map on a table and a brazier burning low, and Davos standing to one side with the quiet face of a man managing his own opinions carefully. Stannis points to the neck without looking up. He wants Jon's read on how far the Free Folk column can push before morale softens. Jon tells him 4 days at current pace before the fighters start looking north, wondering what they left behind the wall. Stannis nods, adjusts his calculation, and moves on to supply numbers. He does not ask about Val. He does not ask what the Watch Brothers' absence costs. He asks tactical questions and expects tactical answers. And when he has what he needs, He dismisses Jon with a look and returns to the map. Jon walks back to his tent in the dark and does not feel like a son. He did not expect to feel like a son, but somewhere underneath the part of him that accepted this arrangement as necessary there is a smaller part that is colder than the air around him. Meanwhile, the ravens are moving faster than the army. At Winterfell, Robb stands before his bannermen in the Great Hall for the third time in a fortnight, and the hall is running out of goodwill. Lord Manderley thinks the Free Folk Alliance is the only smart play left. Lord Glover thinks it is an insult to every northern family that has lost a man to wildling raids across 2 generations. They have said versions of this to each other twice already, and the words are getting shorter and sharper with repetition. Roose Bolton sits at the far end of the table and says very little. When he does speak, it is to ask questions, mild, reasonable questions, that nonetheless always land beside the most anxious lord in the room. He wonders aloud whether Jon's oath to the Watch complicates the legitimacy of the Union. He wonders whether Stannis' authority to legitimize anyone is recognized by Winterfell's maester. He does not advocate for any position. He simply plants and moves on, and by the end of the session the skeptics are louder than they were at the start, and Roose Bolton is looking at the table with a small, neutral expression. Robb sees it. He dismisses the hall and sits with Bran, and says nothing for a long while. "He's doing it on purpose," Bran says. "I know," Robb tells him. "I just can't prove it." Far south, in King's Landing, Cersei receives a new letter bearing the mark of the Vale, written in Littlefinger's precise and almost delicate hand. He lays out the march south in specific detail troop numbers, the route through the Gift, the Free Folk column's estimated strength. He frames it as concern, which is the register Cersei finds most useful and most contemptible in equal measure. She reads it once and burns it, and tells Qyburn she needs more riders north before Stannis crosses the neck. The letters that go out from King's Landing that week do not need to be subtle. They need to be loud and repeated and arrive in every castle hall in the north before Stannis does. Jon Snow abandoned his sacred oath. Jon Snow took a wildling to his bed and called it diplomacy. Jon Snow is Stannis' creature, and the Free Folk marching south are not allies, they are an invasion wearing a political mask. Some lords believe it because they were looking for a reason to. Some believe it the way men believe anything that arrives with official seals and confident language, which is to say, without thinking too carefully about who sent it. The column reaches Moat Cailin on the 14th day. Stannis halts at the ruined fortress to consolidate the supply wagons, rest the horses, and wait. The ruins are a grim place to wait old stone and older ghosts, and the neck spreading flat and grey in every direction, and the causeway running north like a thread pulled tight between 2 uncertain things. Robb's envoy arrives on the 2nd day of the halt. He is a minor lord Jon does not know well, riding with 6 men, and a letter sealed with the direwolf of Stark. He presents the letter to Jon rather than to Stannis, which is either a careful diplomatic signal or a slight, and it is impossible to tell which Robb intended. Jon reads it. A diplomatic acknowledgement. Well wishes. No troops. No commitment. A door left open, and no one walking through it. He stands with the letter in his hand and looks at the causeway. Val finds him there. She does not ask what the letter says. She reads it in his face, and lets the silence stand before she speaks. Patience, she says. Push for an answer now, and you'll get the wrong one. Stannis won't wait long. Then give him something else to focus on. She nods toward the southern road. The march isn't done. Neither is he. That evening Stannis calls Jon into the command tent and says what Jon already knew was coming. Robb's hesitation is not caution. It is the first sign of a fracture. If Jon cannot bring the north, The North becomes a liability, and Stannis does not carry liabilities. Jon listens and says he understands and walks back out into the cold. He does not write to Robb again that night. He sits by the fire with Ghost's head across his knee and thinks about the name on the legitimization document and the silence inside the letter from Winterfell, and he is not sure the two things belong to the same story yet. He hopes they will. He is not sure. Hope is enough. The envoy requests a formal audience the next morning. Not with Jon. With Stannis. Jon finds out from Davos, who tells him quietly over a breakfast neither of them eats much of, that the envoy, a Lord Glover cousin by the look of the seal, arrived at the command tent at first light with a second letter and a request for terms. Stannis has agreed to hear them. Jon is expected to attend. The command tent is cold despite the brazier. The envoy stands at the table with the bearing of a man who has rehearsed his words and knows they may not land well. He is young, maybe 20, with a Glover's dark colouring and the careful eyes of someone doing a job on behalf of a principal who is not in the room. He reads the terms from the letter. The North will formally recognize Jon's legitimization and his marriage to Val. It will acknowledge the free folk as allies under Jon's wardenship, rather than as invaders. In exchange, Stannis Baratheon pledges to withdraw his claim to the Iron Throne. He will instead recognize Robb Stark as king in the North, and Jon Baratheon as warden of the North under Robb's authority. The arrangement is framed as partnership. The language is Robb's, direct, honorable, politically catastrophic for Stannis. Stannis listens without interruption. He looks at the table when the envoy finishes. "No," he says. The envoy asks if Stannis wishes to propose counterterms. "No," Stannis says again, and this time the word lands harder. Jon speaks before the envoy can retreat. He tells the man he wants his own message sent back to Winterfell. A simple one. He asks where the North stands, not with Stannis, with him, with its own kin. The envoy looks uncomfortable. He says he will carry whatever Lord Jon wishes to send. "Then carry this," Jon says. "Tell Robb I'm asking him plainly. We grew up in the same hall. I need to know if that counts for anything now." The envoy nods and goes. Stannis watches him leave, and then looks at Jon with the flat gaze of a man who finds personal appeals to kinship professionally irritating. "You gave him nothing to bring back," Stannis says. "I gave him a question. The answer will tell us more than a counteroffer would." Stannis says nothing to that. He returns to the map. Davos catches Jon's eye and gives him the small look that means, "That went as well as it was going to." The answer comes 3 days later. It comes not from Robb himself, but through the envoy, still camped at the moat's edge on Robb's instructions. The North is neutral. Robb cannot recognize Stannis' legitimization without recognizing Stannis' kingship, and he will not do that. He cannot oppose Stannis openly without exposing Winterfell to a second front it cannot survive. He is sorry. He wishes Jon well. He hopes they will find a way through. Jon reads the envoy's delivered words in the courtyard of Moat Kailin's ruins, with the grey sky above him, and does not say anything for a long moment. Neutral. His brother, whom he loved before he knew what love cost, has looked at the board and found no square he can stand on that doesn't break something he needs. Jon understands it. He does not feel it any less for understanding it. Val is nearby when he looks up. She has been watching him read and does not pretend otherwise. "Neutrality," she says. It is not a question. He nods. She is quiet a moment. When she speaks, it is without anger, which makes it land harder than anger would. The free folk do not follow titles. They follow men who can hold what they claim. You have the name Baratheon on a paper that the North won't acknowledge, and a king behind you that the Iron Throne calls a rebel. She meets his eyes. Give them something real to follow, or they will drift before the season turns. Jon knows she is right. It doesn't help to know it. That afternoon the second blow arrives. A raven from a castle south of the Neck, one of the few northern lords still corresponding with King's Landing. The message the bird carries is not addressed to Stannis. It is addressed to every lord in the realm, copied and dispatched widely enough that its arrival here is almost incidental. The Crown's proclamation. Tommen Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men and the Seven Kingdoms, and the council acting in his name, hereby declares that Jon Snow, bastard of the late Eddard Stark, has broken his sacred oath to the Night's Watch and abandoned his post. That any legitimization granted by Stannis Baratheon, a rebel claimant holding no lawful authority to grant such an honor, is void in the eyes of the realm and the faith. That his so-called marriage to a wildling woman carries no standing in law or custom and will not be recognized by any seat of lawful governance in the Seven Kingdoms. The language is precise. It would have taken a good lawyer. Jon thinks, distantly, that Cersei has always kept good lawyers. He reads it once and passes it to Davos. Davos reads it and sets it on the table and looks at Stannis. Stannis reads it standing and hands it back to Davos. Well, Stannis says, now you know what it costs. That night, Stannis calls Jon to the command tent and speaks with the directness Jon has come to expect from him, which is the only thing about Stannis he has learned to be grateful for. The political ground is narrowing. Robb's neutrality leaves the North leaderless for their purposes, a country full of bannermen who will not commit. The Crown's proclamation will harden those bannermen further. Jon's name, his marriage, the Free Folk Alliance, all of it rests on the assumption that the North would eventually see it as its own. Without Northern recognition, they are a stateless army moving through a kingdom that does not want them. The solution, Stannis says, is to take what will not be given. Jon asks what that means specifically. Stannis tells him, march north, not south to the Riverlands to fight the Lannisters, but north, back through the Neck and into the northern heartland. Seize Winterfell, hold it in Jon's name, not Stannis's. Give the northern lords a Stark-raised lord sitting in Ned Stark's seat and the free folk standing at his back, and neutrality becomes untenable. They will declare. They will have to. Jon stares at the map, at Winterfell, at the line of march that would take him back through everything he just left. Bran is at Winterfell, he says. Stannis says he is aware. He's 10 years old. He is a Stark lord, holding a seat that Bolton's men are undermining from within. His presence there is either an asset or a hostage, depending on who moves first. I am suggesting we move first. Jon does not answer immediately. He looks at the map and thinks about the letter from Robb, the careful, exhausted neutrality of it, and thinks about Val's words in the courtyard and the proclamation and Sam's face at Castle Black when they said goodbye. He thinks about a paper with the name Jon Baratheon written on it in Stannis's hand, and what it has actually bought him so far, and what it has cost people who did not sign it. His marriage has made him a border between things. His legitimization has given enemies a target and friends a reason to hesitate. He has become, without quite meaning to, a pawn in the gap between a northern king who cannot back him and a southern rebel who will use him until he isn't useful. He doesn't say this aloud. He tells Stannis he needs until morning. Stannis tells him to take the morning. Jon walks back to the fire. Ghost is already there. The cold is what it always is. Morning comes grey and still over the neck. Jon tells Stannis he will march north. Stannis nods as though he expected nothing else, then tells Jon what he has already decided for himself. He is not going north. The Riverlands are where the war can be won or lost before winter locks every road, and Stannis cannot sit at Moat Cailin waiting on a northern king who will not commit. He will take the bulk of the army south. Jon will take the wildlings, the loyal northern scouts, and a garrison of 200 to hold the causeway, or abandon the causeway and push to Winterfell if Robb's neutrality holds. He says it the way he says most things, which is to say, he says it as though the decision is already history, and Jon's agreement is a formality. And if I reach Winterfell and the lords won't declare, Jon says, then you hold it anyway. A man sitting in a seat is harder to dislodge than a principle written on paper. Stannis folds the map. You have the name. Use the seat. Jon walks back to the wildling camp with that instruction sitting in his chest like a stone he has not decided what to do with yet. The splitting of the column takes most of the day. It does not go cleanly. Stannis's cavalry and infantry begin organizing by mid-morning, drawing away from the mixed mass of free folk and northern outriders in ways that make the wildlings restless. They watch the Southron soldiers form up and move, and they understand what a departing army looks like, because they have seen it from the other side often enough. Some of them have been drifting since the halt at Moat Cailin, ranging further in their camps, speaking less to the northern scouts and more to each other. By afternoon, when Stannis's column has actually gone, and the dust of it has settled on the southern road, 3 groups of wildlings have quietly vanished into the western marshes. Tormund rides after one of them and comes back empty-handed and angrier than Jon has seen him since Castle Black. Harwick's lot, Tormund says, meaning the western reavers who never fully trusted the arrangement. They're done. Jon asks how many. 200. Maybe more. Tormund spits. Can't blame them. They signed on to Mance. Then they signed on to you. Now the big king's gone south and we're pointing back toward the wall, and they've got families scattered across the gift. He looks north. They want something solid to put their hands on. Jon has no answer for that either. He is becoming aware that he spends most of his time lately without answers, and that this is not a temporary condition. It is Val who steadies what is left. She does it without speeches or ceremony, which is part of why it works. She moves through the remaining camp in the way she has always moved, without apparent urgency, and she speaks to the clan heads and the war leaders as equals, and she asks them specific things, what their people need, what their dead left behind, where they want to winter when this is done. Jon watches her do it from across the camp and understands that she has been the actual center of the free folk's compliance since before they left Castle Black. He provided the legal architecture. She provided the reason to stay inside it. By nightfall, roughly 800 wildlings remain committed to the march north. Not an army. Enough. They move out the next morning. The road north through the neck is the same road they came south on 2 weeks ago, and it feels longer going back. The trees close in. The boggy ground on either side of the causeway swallows sound and gives nothing back. Ghost runs ahead and returns, and the scouts keep a wider perimeter than they did on the southward march, because the landscape is lonelier now without Stannis's cavalry at the front and the columns of Southron infantry behind. Word reaches them on the 3rd day of the northward march, carried by a rider from one of the minor northern lords who has been trying to reach the column since before they left Moat Cailin. Roose Bolton has been busy. He has called on two of Robb's more uncertain bannermen, Dustin and Ricewell, and whatever he said to them in private was persuasive enough that both have gone quiet, stopped answering ravens from Winterfell's Maester, stopped sending men to Robb's muster. Lord Serwyn has moved his household guard closer to his own walls. None of this is open defiance. All of it is the careful groundwork of men who have decided to wait and see who arrives in force. Jon rides with the letter in his hand for an hour before he passes it to Val. She reads it without comment, then folds it and tucks it inside her cloak. "Bolton," she says. "Aye." "He's cutting Robb off from his own lords, making sure Robb arrives at your gate already weakened." She thinks for a moment. "Which means he expects you to reach Winterfell." Jon looks at her. "He wants you there," she says. "A Stark-raised lord with a wildling army sitting in the castle is a problem for Robb, not for Bolton. Every northern lord who is unsure about you is a Lord Bolton, can pull further toward himself." Jon had seen part of that. Not all of it laid out that flatly. "Then we don't give him the picture he wants." "No, but we still need the castle." They arrive at Winterfell on the 7th day, north of Moat Cailin. Jon has not seen Winterfell's walls since before the Watch. He thought he remembered them accurately, and finds when he rounds the tree line and the castle comes into view that he did not. The towers are taller in his memory. The reality is wider and lower and older looking in the grey morning light, and the dire wolf banners on the walls are slightly ragged at the edges from the season's wind. It looks like what it is, which is a castle being held by a 10-year-old boy with a small council and too many enemies watching from the tree line. Bran's men on the gate recognize Jon before the column halts. Jon can see them move on the battlements and can imagine the argument already happening inside the walls. He holds the column at 300 yards and rides forward alone, with only Ghost at his flank, and calls up to the gate. The answer comes back after a long pause. The gate opens enough for a single rider. Jon dismounts and goes in on foot. Bran is waiting in the great hall, seated at the high table, with two of his minor lords standing behind him, and the old maester at his elbow. He is small in the chair. His legs don't reach the floor. His face, though, is still, and the eyes in that still face are watching Jon with an attention that is not 10 years old. For a moment, Jon does not know what to say. He crosses the hall and stops at the edge of the table and looks at his brother. "Jon," Bran says. His voice is careful. "Bran." Jon looks at him and feels something in his chest that is older than titles or proclamations. "I'm not here to take anything from you." Bran holds his gaze. "The free folk are outside my walls." "Yes." "And you have Stannis' name on a paper." "I have his name on a paper that the Iron Throne has called void, which makes it less a claim and more a reason people want me dead." Jon pulls a chair out and sits down without being asked, because standing in front of Bran like a petitioner feels wrong. "I need shelter for the winter. I need a place to stand where the northern lords can see me. I'm not asking you to give up the seat." Bran looks at him for a long time. Then he looks at the lord to his left and the maester, and back at Jon. "One night," he says, "under parley. Then we talk properly." Jon nods. "That's all I'm asking." It is not all he is asking, and they both know it, but it is what they have for now. The gate opens wider, and Val rides in at the head of what remains of the Free Folk column, and Winterfell's great yard fills with people and animals and noise, and the seat of House Stark becomes something it has never been before. Jon watches it happen and does not know yet whether he has arrived or whether he has simply moved the problem to a different address. The proper talk happens the next morning, in the crypts. It is Robb's suggestion, passed through the Maester the night before, while Jon and the free folk made camp in Winterfell's outer yard, and the castle's household moved around them with the careful, wide-eyed wariness of people who have been told to behave normally and cannot quite manage it. Jon accepts the location without comment. The crypts are the only place in Winterfell where neither of them is lord or commander or symbol. They are just brothers, and the dead kings around them are older than any title either of them currently holds. Robb is already there when Jon descends. He stands with a torch near their father's statue, and the light throws his shadow long up the wall. He looks older than 17 in the torchlight. He also looks tired in a way that 17 should not yet produce. Jon stops a few feet away. For a moment, they just look at each other in the way of men who have too much to say to begin easily. Robb speaks first. He tells Jon directly that the wildlings cannot stay inside the walls. Some of his bannermen are already threatening to decamp, and he cannot hold the north together with a camp of free folk in the great yard as the centerpiece of a conversation he cannot win. Jon does not argue the point. He says the wildlings will move to the Wolf's Wood before the week is out. He needs two things: formal northern recognition of his legitimization, and acknowledgement that the Free Folk Alliance is real and not a threat. Robb's jaw tightens. He says he cannot give him recognition without giving Stannis what comes with it, and he will not put a crown on Stannis' head. Not while the North has its own king. Not after everything the South has already taken from them. Jon looks at Ned Stark's stone face in the dark and thinks about all the things his father kept to himself for 17 years, because keeping them was the honorable thing to do, and where that honorable silence ended up. He tells Robb the marriage and the legitimization were not about Stannis. They were about the wall and what is coming through it. He tells him about the things he saw north of the wall, the things Mance ran from, that the free folk ran from, that no one in the south believes are real yet. He tells him that 10,000 wildling spearmen standing next to northern boys when the cold comes is not an embarrassment. It is survival. Robb listens. He is not a stupid man, and Jon has always known it. When Jon finishes, Robb is quiet for a long count, and the torchlight moves on the old stone. Then he offers what he can offer. He will not support Jon publicly, and he will not oppose him publicly. He will send a raven to the northern lords, suggesting a wait-and-see approach, which is what most of them want to hear anyway. Jon can use Winterfell's guest right through the winter. The free folk go to the Wolf's Wood. Jon makes no claim to the wardenship, and makes no declarations in Winterfell's great hall that would force Robb's bannermen to choose. It is less than Jon needs, and more than he expected. He accepts it. They stand in the dark a moment longer before they go back up, and neither of them says the obvious thing, which is that they are both threading needles in a storm, and sooner or later, one of them is going to be cut. The wildlings move to the Wolf's Wood within 3 days. Val organizes the resettlement with the same quiet efficiency she has applied to everything since Castle Black, assigning ground, settling disputes over shelter, sending out hunting parties along routes she selects herself after speaking with Winterfell's outer foresters. Jon watches the yard empty and feels the change in the castle's atmosphere almost immediately. The household servants breathe visibly easier. The minor lords who had been hovering in the gallery above the great hall come back down to the floor. Bran's master stops jumping at shadows. Val, for her part, takes a room in the western tower rather than the yard. She does not ask Jon's permission. She simply moves. The free folk inside the walls, 20 or so who serve as liaisons and messengers, treat her comings and goings as normal, because to them, they are. Jon finds her on the battlements the evening the last of the Wolfswood camp is established, looking north with the wind moving through her hair. He stands beside her, and she does not acknowledge him immediately, which by now he understands means she is thinking, and not that she is angry. "Bolton's men are watching the eastern road," she says finally. "2 riders switching off. They've been there 4 days. Jon looks east. He can see nothing in the dark, which is not the same as nothing being there. "You're sure?" "My people know when they're being watched. We've spent most of our lives being watched." She turns from the wall. "He is mapping your movements. Someone is waiting for a report." The raven from Stannis arrives 2 days later. It is written in Stannis's hand, which means no softening from Davos, no diplomatic layering. The campaign in the Riverlands has met resistance harder than anticipated. Lannister forces under Kevan have regrouped faster than Stannis's scouts predicted, and the Frey levies at the Twins have closed the crossings. Without the free folk numbers he expected to have, Stannis cannot break the Lannister line before the ground freezes. He needs Jon and the remaining 800 to march south immediately, rejoining the column near the Ruby Ford. He does not ask. He instructs. Jon reads the raven twice and sets it on the table. He thinks about 800 wildlings pulling out of the Wolfswood in winter to march south into a Riverlands campaign that is already stalling. He thinks about what that departure does to Robb's fragile tolerance and to the northern lords who are currently sitting on their hands. He thinks about the 2 Bolton riders watching the eastern road. Stannis's letter makes clear, without stating it plainly, that if Jon does not march south, the campaign may not survive the season, and with it, the military force that makes Jon's legitimization anything more than a piece of paper. Jon understands the implication. He is a tool, and Stannis is informing him the tool is needed elsewhere. The courtesy of the message is in the fact that he was told at all. He does not send a reply that night. He sits with the letter and Ghost and the dying fire, and thinks about what it means that the only king who has ever given him a name is now the king most likely to leave him exposed if the name stops being useful. By morning he has not decided, but the shape of the decision is clearer. He cannot march south without abandoning everything he brought north. He cannot stay without eventually forcing Robb to act. Bolton is already moving, patient and invisible along the eastern road, waiting for the moment Jon's position here becomes the exact kind of fracture he can push his hand into. The question is not which direction to march. The question is whether there is a move that does not leave something essential behind. Jon stares at the fire until the wood is ash and has not found the answer yet when the cold comes through the shutters and Ghost lifts his head from the floor and stares at nothing, the way he does when something outside the walls has changed. Ghost lifts his head from the floor and stares at nothing for a long moment before settling again. Jon watches him and then watches the dead fire and makes his decision. He replies to Stannis's raven before dawn. He keeps it short because there is nothing elaborate to say. He cannot strip the Wolfswood camp of its strength midwinter without collapsing the agreement that holds the free folk here. He does not write what he actually means, which is that leaving now would finish whatever Robb's guest right has built before it has the chance to become something real. He seals it and gives it to the Maester and goes to find Val. She is already awake. When Jon arrives, she sends the liaison men back toward the gate and turns to him with an expression that tells him she already knows what the Raven said. "You're going to march south," she says. "I haven't decided. The Bolton riders on the eastern road are gone. They left in the night." She pauses. "That means a report went somewhere. Gone riders mean Bolton has what he needed. Staying now while Bolton shapes the next move around whatever was in that report feels like standing in a room while someone locks the door from outside." He tells her that night that they are leaving. He expects an argument about timing. He gets something harder than that. Val sits across the fire in the Western Tower room and tells him plainly that the free folk will not follow a lord who abandons his own seat twice. The first time was the wall and the march south, and she did not hold that against him, because the cause was real and the direction was forward. But leaving Winterfell in winter with no declaration and no fight is not strategy. It is retreat, dressed in other words. She tells him the wildlings have stories about men like that. None of the stories end well for the man. Jon says that staying means Bolton picks the ground and the moment, and they fight from inside a castle that is not theirs, with a host too small, and a northern king sworn to do nothing. For a moment, Val says nothing. The fire moves between them. Then she tells him she will ride with him, but he should understand what he is spending. They break camp 3 days later. Robb sees them off from the gate without ceremony, which is probably the best either of them can manage. Jon does not ask again for what Robb has already said he cannot give. They grip each other's arm at the gate, and Robb says he will send word if the situation shifts. Jon nods and rides out, and does not look back at the walls. The ambush comes on the 4th day out of Winterfell, in a stretch of road where the trees lean close on both sides, and the ground has frozen hard enough that the column's footsteps carry further than they should. The men come out of the tree line fast, disguised well enough that the first 2 free folk outriders are already down before anyone understands. This is organized and purposeful, rather than opportunist. They have numbers, and they have the ground, and for the first minutes, the column's vanguard simply dies while the rest scrambles to form. Ghost tears through the left flank before Jon can reach the front. The screaming from that side changes character. Jon cuts south through the crush toward the ambush leader, who is directing men with the specific, unhurried confidence of someone running a rehearsed plan. He is good. He lasts longer than most. But the fight ends when Jon runs him through and goes through his pockets while the blood is still pooling on the frozen road. The Bolton sigil is sewn into the man's collar lining. Small and careful, the kind of detail you add if you expect the body to be searched. Jon stands in the road with the dead around him, and the fighting still grinding behind him, and stares at the stitched flayed man on grey cloth. Val is already moving, reforming the wildling flank, shouting in the free folk tongue at scattered men. Her sword arm is wrong. She holds the blade in her left hand, and her right arm hangs. The column fights free by midday. 43 free folk dead, 11 garrison soldiers. The wounded are more than that, and there is no maester, no milk of the poppy, no time to stop. Jon orders a forced march south before Bolton can send a second force up the road. Val rides. She says nothing about her arm. When Jon pulls alongside her that evening and tells her to stop and let him look, she lets him. The wound is a deep cut across the shoulder, already hot to the touch in the cold air. She watches his face while he wraps it and reads what she sees there. Bolton's going to keep sending men, she says. Then we need to move faster than his ravens. The column strips supplies down to what can be carried and pushes south through frozen road with scouts ranging wide and Ghost running the perimeter in the dark. The fever in Val's shoulder climbs with the pace. She does not say so. The liaison men who ride near her see it in the color of her face and the way she sits the horse by the third day, upright by will rather than strength. She dies on the 5th day, south of Winterfell, before they reach Stannis' camp. She goes quietly. Jon is riding beside her when it happens, and there is a moment before it is fully real, where the world simply continues around them, the column moving and the grey sky going on in every direction, without acknowledgement. Jon carries her himself to the edge of camp when they reach Stannis' lines at the Ruby Ford. The wildlings build a proper pyre, and Tormund speaks over it in the free folk tongue. And the words are not for Jon, who understands most of them, but stands outside their reach tonight. Stannis comes out of his command tent to watch from 20 yards. He does not speak. His face is unreadable in the firelight. Afterward, Tormund finds Jon at the edge of the river and tells him he is taking his people west, toward the Vale, away from this war that keeps spending free folk lives for Southron goals. He does not say it with anger. He says it the way a man closes a door he has been standing in for too long. Half the wildlings go with him before morning. The rest stay. They stay for Val, and because they have nowhere else to go. Jon stands at the Ruby Ford with 400 wildlings, and a name that feels like it belongs to a different man entirely, and the fire going cold behind him. Stannis summons him before the fire has gone cold over Val's pyre. The command tent is small and practical, the way all of Stannis' spaces are. Maps weighted at the corners with river stones. A single lamp. Davos stands near the entrance with the expression of a man who has already heard the plan and has said what he can say about it. Stannis does not look up when Jon enters. He lays out the situation in the flat, undecorated way he lays out everything, as though sentiment is a kind of imprecision. The Riverlands campaign cannot move. Kevan Lannister has sealed the southern crossings, and the Frey levies hold the twins against him. Without numbers he does not have, Stannis cannot break through before the ground freezes solid and his supply lines collapse. The campaign as designed is finished, but the North is not. Bolton holds Winterfell with lords who bent to him because there was no better offer. Jon's name is that offer. Jon's wildlings are the force Bolton cannot match on open ground, because Bolton's strength is treachery and patience, and the free folk do not negotiate and are not impressed by patience. Stannis proposes they march north immediately, take Winterfell, install Jon as Warden of the North under Stannis' overlordship, and use northern grain, northern timber, and northern men to rebuild a campaign in the spring that the Lannisters cannot stop. He speaks for perhaps 4 minutes. Then he waits. Jon stands on the other side of the map table and thinks about the 400 wildlings camped outside this tent who stayed because Val died and they had nowhere left to go. He thinks about the Bolton sigil sewn into a dead man's collar. He thinks about what it means that the man who arranged Val's death is currently sitting in Winterfell's great hall, eating Stark food and sleeping in rooms that once belonged to people Jon grew up beside. He says yes. He says it without the particular feeling a man is supposed to have when he commits to a war. But the word is real, and Stannis accepts it without ceremony, which suits both of them. Davos catches Jon at the tent flap on the way out, and says quietly that he is sorry about Val. He means it. Jon can tell the difference. The column turns north the next morning. It is slow going. Winter has found the road properly now, and the 400 wildlings move at a pace set by terrain rather than urgency. Jon rides near the front and says little. The remaining free folk give him space without being asked. They understand grief. They do not mistake silence for weakness the way Southron men sometimes do. The raven from Robb intercepts them 4 days north of the Ruby Ford, carried by a rider who has pushed his horse too hard, and arrives at the column's vanguard with a lathered animal and a sealed letter. Jon breaks the seal and reads it on horseback without stopping. Robb writes that he is moving north from the Neck with what men he has to confront Bolton before Bolton consolidates further. He has learned of Stannis' northward march through his own scouts, and he understands what it means. The realm is breaking into pieces, he writes, and he will not survive a war on 2 fronts. He proposes a compact. Stannis holds the Iron Throne in the south, Robb holds the north as king. Jon serves as warden under Robb's authority, not Stannis's, binding the free folk to a northern settlement rather than a royal one. Together they march on King's Landing in the spring and end the Lannister regency. He asks for a meeting. Jon hands the letter to the rider who has ridden alongside him and tells him to bring it to Stannis at the column's rear and wait for a reply. He does not go himself. He already knows what Stannis will say. Stannis's reply arrives within the hour, carried back by the same exhausted rider. It is brief. Stannis will not be subordinated to a self-proclaimed king whose authority extends only as far as his bannermen's patience. He is the true king of the 7 kingdoms by right of blood and law, and he does not negotiate that fact. If Robb Stark wishes to march on King's Landing alongside him, the terms are fealty, not partnership. The rider looks at Jon with the expression of a man who was hoping for better news to carry home. Jon tells him to make camp for the night and ride back in the morning. He sends no additional words with him. By evening, the column has made another 6 miles. Jon sits outside his tent, with Ghost pressed against his leg, and thinks about Robb writing that letter, knowing how Stannis would answer, sending it anyway because there was nothing else to try. He understands the feeling. Far south of them, in the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister receives her intelligence briefing on the northward march and goes very still. She has read 3 reports in the last fortnight and found them variously incomplete, and this one is the first that clarifies what Stannis actually intends. Not a siege, not a consolidation at the Ruby Ford, a march on Winterfell, with Jon Snow at the head of a wildling column, a march that, if it succeeds, gives Stannis a functioning northern base, grain stores, castle walls, and the political legitimacy of having unseated a proven traitor in Bolton. None of that can be allowed to happen. She sends for Mace Tyrell that same evening. She is warm with him in the way she is warm when she needs something large from someone vain, and Mace responds to warmth the way flowers respond to sunlight. She explains the situation in terms that make Mace feel like the solution is his own idea by the end of it. The Reach will raise its banners. Its armies will move north and west to intercept Stannis before he reaches the north, cutting the column off in the open country below the Neck where there are no walls to hide behind. Mace agrees. He even looks pleased about it. When he is gone, she sits in the small room she uses when she does not want to be watched and thinks about Jon Snow specifically. Stannis is a problem of scale, a campaign problem, a problem for armies. But Jon Snow is a problem of symbol. Every day he is alive with his bastard name and his wildling soldiers, and his Baratheon legitimization is a day the story she has been building collapses a little further. A king in waiting, a man of the wall who chose something else. The story is too easy for people to believe in. She does not tell Mace about the second piece of what she sends north. That one goes to 3 men who have no house sigil and no name anyone would recognize. The instruction is simple and carries no Lannister seal. The Night's Watch lost one of their own when Jon Snow broke his oath. Men who loved the Watch remember. The work, when it is done, should look like exactly that. Jon does not know about the Tyrell banners moving north. He does not know about the 3 riders who follow his column's track with no insignia and careful spacing. He knows about the cold and the road and the 400 wildlings moving through the grey morning behind him, and the shape of what he is committed to, which is conquest rather than return. Ghost ranges ahead on the march and doubles back to Jon's side by evening every day, reliable as breathing. The wildlings have started watching the wolf the way they used to watch Val for signals, reading the set of his ears and the angle of his head for information about what the wind carries. Jon watches them do this and does not say anything about it. North of them, Winterfell waits. Bolton is in its walls with his careful, patient treachery. Robb is somewhere between them, and the realm, which was fracturing slowly for years before any of this started, is now fracturing fast. The march goes on. The neck pulls at everything. The road north through the marshes is barely road at all by the second day, more suggestion than surface, and the column picks its way through it in single file, with scouts ranging the reed beds on either side, and coming back wet to the knee and grim-faced. Jon rides near the front. Ghost moves through the fog ahead of them both and comes back with nothing on his coat, which means no ambush in the immediate dark, which is the best news available. Stannis sends Davos north 3 days into the march. The reasoning is clean. Robb has not answered the last raven, and Stannis reads silence as opposition, but a man arriving in person with terms is harder to ignore than parchment. Davos carries a sealed offer. Stannis' throne. Robb keeps the north. Jon serves as warden under Robb's overlordship, which is a concession Stannis does not announce, loudly because it costs him something to make it. Jon watches Davos ride north with 2 riders and no herald, and thinks about what Robb will do with that offer. He does not think about it long. There is too much road. Lannister scouts appear on the column's flanks, a day south of the neck's northern edge. They do not engage. They watch from distance and then vanish, which is worse than engagement, because it means the information is going somewhere useful. Jon orders the pace increased, and the flanking scouts doubled, and says nothing to his 400 about what the Watchers mean. They already know. Word of Davos never comes back south. On the 7th day, a single rider arrives from the northwest in Robb's colours, and he has a message for Stannis, redirected, because Davos never reached Winterfell. Bolton riders met him a day north of the neck on the King's Road. Davos is taken. The offer never reached Robb. Stannis receives this in the evening and says nothing for a long time. Then he tells Jon the situation is clear. Robb has aligned with Bolton, or is too weak to prevent Bolton from acting in his name. Either way, the march to Winterfell proceeds as a military operation, not a diplomatic one. He does not ask Jon's opinion. Jon does not offer it. 2 days later, the column splits at the last Hearth crossroads. Stannis takes the main body west toward the coastal road, keeping his heavier forces on open ground. Jon pushes north toward Last Hearth with the 400 wildlings into Umber territory, where the lords have been sitting on their hands, waiting to see which side wins before committing to either. The ambush comes out of the tree line at dawn. They have numbers, and they have the ground. The wildlings, worn and diminished, do not have the depth to absorb the first hit the way a fresh force could. The vanguard takes the blow hard. Men go down in the frozen road mud before the horn sounds. Jon rides forward into it before he has a complete picture of what he is riding into, which is a mistake, and he knows it while he is making it. Ghost takes the left flank. The screaming from that side changes pitch. Jon cuts toward the center and finds 3 men positioned specifically to separate him from the column's main body. No insignia. They move with the patience of men who have been paid in advance and are not in a hurry. The nearest one has a crossbow. He takes the bolt through his left side between 2 ribs before Ghost reaches the crossbowman. The impact throws him sideways in the saddle. He keeps his seat by reflex, and then the fighting is all around him, and there is no time to think about his breathing. He kills 2 of the 3 before one of his guards reaches the 3rd. By then the wildling line has broken in 2 places, and the column is fragmenting, smaller groups splitting off into the trees without orders. Jon cannot stop it. He finds his remaining 4 guards, and they pull him north off the road while Ghost covers the retreat. By midday the field is quiet, in the way fields are quiet after. 40 men dead. More missing. The cohesion of the 400 is gone, scattered groups moving through the umber forest without command. Jon sits against a tree with his hand pressed to his side. The same ground, more or less. The same Bolton calculation. One of his guards pulls the bolt. Jon does not make a sound. Ghost settles beside him and watches the trees. Robb comes out of those trees 3 hours later. He has 40 riders with him, and he pulls up at the road's edge when he sees the dead, then pushes forward fast when he sees Jon against the tree. He comes down from the saddle quickly, and for a moment he just stands there, looking at his brother alive and bleeding and grey-faced, and something in his expression breaks open that he does not usually show. "I came as soon as I knew Bolton moved," Robb says. "You're late." "I know." He crouches down. "Let me see it." Jon shows him. Robb looks at the wound with the steady attention of a young king who has seen enough of them to know which ones kill fast and which ones do not. This one will not kill fast. "Bolton ordered this," Jon says. "I know that too." Robb is quiet. Then he says, "I kept thinking there was a political resolution, some way to neutralize him without open war. There wasn't." "No." He stands. "There wasn't." They speak for a long time in the grey afternoon, Jon on the ground and Robb above him, about Stannis somewhere west with a stalling column, about Davos taken, about the wildlings now scattered through the umber forest, about Bolton in Winterfell with borrowed authority, waiting to see who arrives at his gates first. Robb says he will support the march on Winterfell, not Stannis's kingship, not the legitimization as Stannis framed it. But Jon's claim to the north, his own half-brother's right to the land their family held for 8,000 years, against a man who bought his position with massacre and betrayal. He will march. He will put his banner beside Jon's and let Bolton look out from the walls and understand what that means. Jon asks what changed his mind. Robb looks at the dead on the road. "You were right in the crypts," he says. "I was trying to hold on to something already gone." Far south of them, the Reach banners are moving. Mace Tyrell's army catches Stannis's column in open country below the neck, in a flat stretch that gives the larger force every advantage it wants. Stannis fights with the grim discipline that defines him, holding his line longer than any reasonable assessment would predict. But the numbers are not close, and the ground is wrong. By late afternoon, his rear breaks. He orders a fighting withdrawal north, leaving a rear guard to slow the Tyrells, and the column retreats in good order, but with losses it cannot replace. Davos is not with them when they regroup. Taken in the first hour, separated during the cavalry press on the western flank. Stannis notes his absence and continues the march north. He has no choice now, Winterfell or nothing. Robb's master binds Jon's side that same evening, tight enough to make breathing a conscious act. And by morning, Jon is on horseback again, with Robb's 40 riders arranged around him, and the scattered wildlings reformed into something resembling a column. They move north. Jon does not speak much. Robb rides beside him and watches the road ahead with the particular vigilance of a man who has already been surprised once and is not planning to be surprised again. Ghost ranges wide through the umber forest and comes back clean each time, which is the only comfort available. Stannis arrives at Winterfell 2 days after they do. He comes through the southern gate with fewer than 600 men, which is the most precise accounting of how badly the Tyrell battle went. The rear guard bought enough distance that the Reach forces did not press into the north, but it cost. The men who ride in with Stannis are not the army that left Castle Black. They are what an army leaves behind when it has been hit hard and kept moving. Stannis himself looks the same as he always looks, which is to say severe and unbothered by the gap between what he planned and what happened. He surveys the Winterfell yard, notes Jon's presence, notes Robb's banner above the great hall, and says nothing until his horse is stabled. The council is held in the same room where Ned Stark once heard petitions. Robb sits at the table's head. Stannis sits across from him. Jon stands because sitting pulls at his side, and he would rather be upright for what follows. Robb lays out his offer clearly, the way he lays out everything, without excess. He is not a man who uses ceremony to substitute for argument. Stannis takes the 7 kingdoms. Robb holds the north as king under his own right. Jon serves as warden of the north under Robb's authority, with the remaining free folk sworn to a northern settlement. The compact holds until Stannis sits the Iron Throne and confirms the North's independence by formal decree. Stannis stares at the table for a long moment. "I am the king," he says, "not a claimant, not a pretender. I do not ratify another man's sovereignty, as though it were a grant I am free to give." "You ratify it," Robb says, "or you march south with 200 horse and 400 wildlings against Mace Tyrell's full Reach host." The silence that follows is not comfortable for anyone in it. Jon watches Stannis do the calculation. The man is not stupid, and he is not deluded, which is what makes him dangerous, and also occasionally useful. He knows the numbers. He has been doing nothing but counting numbers since Blackwater. Bran is there, in the shadows near the window, seated in the chair that goes with him everywhere now. He has not spoken. He watches Stannis with grey eyes that take in too much for a boy of 10. And Stannis is one of the few men Jon has met who does not look past Bran when Bran is in a room. Stannis says, "If I confirm northern independence by decree after the throne is won, the other kingdoms will treat it as precedent. Every lord with a grievance will cite it." "Let them," Robb says. "You'll be sitting the Iron Throne. You can afford the precedent." Another silence. Then Stannis looks at Jon. Not for permission. For something else. Some confirmation that Jon is still in this room and still committed to whatever is decided here. Jon says, "Val died for the Alliance. The free folk who stayed did so because she held them after I couldn't. If this compact does not give the North something real, they have no reason to march south and bleed further for a king they don't recognize." Stannis looks at the table again. When he looks up, his expression has not changed, but something behind it has settled. "The North holds its independence pending confirmation by formal decree," he says. "Jon Baratheon serves as Warden of the North under Robb Stark's authority. In spring, the combined force marches south under my command." He stops. I will not say it twice. Robb holds his gaze for a moment, then nods. It is not a warm agreement. It is 2 men who do not like each other deciding that the alternative is worse. Bran speaks for the first time. He says they should put it in writing before anyone rides anywhere. No one argues. Word reaches them the next morning that Bolton is moving, not reinforcing, not consolidating. Moving southeast toward the Dreadfort with his household guard and his Frey allies, stripping Winterfell of everything portable before he goes. The lords who bent to him have already begun sending ravens to Robb. Robb does not wait for a second report. He takes his 40 riders and Jon's recovered wildlings and rides hard to cut the eastern road. They catch Bolton's column at the Twins. It is not a battle in the way the Ruby Ford or the Last Hearth ambush were battles. Bolton's force is not positioned for a fight. They are a column strung out along the road with carts and wagons, and the particular disorder of men who believed they had more time than they did. Robb hits the van and Jon takes the rear, and the wildlings go through the middle the way wildlings do, which is to say, without formation or hesitation, and the whole thing breaks apart inside an hour. Bolton himself is run down near the river's west bank, his horse faltering in the frozen bank mud. He is taken alive, which is not what he expected. Walder Frey is not taken alive. He is in one of the carts near the column's center when the wildlings reach it, and the wildlings remember what the Twins means and what happened inside it, and they do not separate that memory from the old man who bought them their turn at grief. It is quick. Jon does not order it, and he does not stop it, and he does not look at Stannis when it is over. The free folk stand on the riverbank after, and there is something in them that was not there before. Not celebration. Something more settled than that. A debt acknowledged. Jon watches them and thinks that Val would have understood it better than he does, and that she would not have said so, and that the silence between what she understood and what she shared was one of the things he will carry. Bolton is put in irons and taken north. His trial is a matter for later. On the morning of the march south, Jon stands in Winterfell's yard, while men load the supply wagons. Robb walks across the yard to him and stops beside him, and they look at the castle in the grey early light for a moment without speaking. She would have liked it better up here, Robb says finally. He means the north. He means the cold and the stone and the directness of it. Yes, Jon says. Robb does not say anything else about Val, because there is nothing adequate, and he knows that. He grips Jon's arm once, quick and firm, and then walks back to his horse. Jon stands a moment longer. Ghost is at his side, patient as always. The wildlings are already forming up at the gate. The compact is signed. Bolton is in chains. The south is waiting. He walks to his horse and rides out under the Stark banners. The road south opens the way road south of the neck, always open in winter. Grey and long, and indifferent to the men moving along it. Jon rides near the front of the column, with Ghost tracking the verge, and Robb on his right side, and Stannis somewhere behind them both, which is the arrangement Stannis tolerates, because it is Robb's men who know the King's Road below the Trident, and Stannis is practical enough to follow expertise, even when it costs him something in dignity. 600 of Stannis's soldiers, Robb's northern riders, Jon's 400 wildlings. Not large, not what any of them planned, but it is what survived the decisions made from Castle Black down to the Twins, and it moves with the particular focus of an army that has nothing left to lose except the thing it is marching toward. Lannister garrisons do not stand to meet them. The first one, a modest force, holding a riverlands crossing 3 days south of the Twins, looks at the column from the far bank, and then looks at the wildling banners, and then quietly withdraws east before anyone sends a herald. The second does not even wait that long. Word of Bolton's capture travels faster than the column itself, and what the lords of the Riverlands understand when they hear it is that the man who guaranteed Lannister dominance over the north is in chains, and the man who replaced Ned Stark's children at Winterfell lasted less time than a hard season. Stannis notes each withdrawal without visible satisfaction. He rides behind Jon and Robb in silence most days, saving what he says for the evening councils, where he is precise and unhurried in the way of a man who has been waiting years for this particular campaign and is not going to ruin it with impatience now. At the Trident they rest 2 days. Scouts ride south and come back with numbers. King's Landing is fortified. Cersei has pulled in what garrison strength remained in the surrounding crownlands. The city walls are manned. She has not run. Jon does not know whether to respect that or simply note it as a logistical fact to plan around. Robb asks Stannis whether they wait for the Tyrell pursuit to force them forward or push on at their own pace. Stannis says they push on. He has been pushed far enough. They reach the capital's outer approaches on the 23rd day of the march. The city sits on the bay in the flat winter light, enormous and indifferent the way it always is, the red keep rising above everything else, with its towers catching the pale sky. Jon has not been here before. He takes it in once, without ceremony, and then turns his attention to the ground between the column and the walls. The parley is arranged by midday. Cersei sends 3 men under a white flag, a septon, a household knight whose name Jon does not know, and a clerk with a sealed counterproposal that no one opens during the meeting, because the meeting does not reach that point. Stannis presents his terms himself, standing in the frozen grass between the armies, with the wind off the bay, flattening his cloak against his shoulders. He is not theatrical about it. He states what he wants the way he states everything, without decoration. Tommen abdicates. The crown recognizes Stannis Baratheon as the lawful king of the 7 kingdoms. Cersei is to be taken into custody and tried. The Lannister household is to be permitted to retain its lands and titles under renewed vows. The household knight looks at Stannis and then at the wildling line behind him and says the Queen Regent requires time to consider. Stannis says she has had 4 years since Blackwater. She has considered enough. Robb speaks once. Briefly, he demands written confirmation of northern independence as part of any settlement, sealed before any surrender is received. The clerk starts to say something about precedent, and Robb looks at him with the flat, grey patience of a young man who has buried most of the people he loved because of southern political precedent, and the clerk stops. Jon says nothing. He stands at the edge of the parley and watches Cersei's 3 men perform the calculations visible in their faces. They know the terms are non-negotiable. They know the army behind Stannis is smaller than it should be. They know the Tyrell host is somewhere south of the Neck and moving north. They are trying to decide whether Cersei's walls are worth more than the time those walls will buy. The Septon says the Queen Regent refuses all terms. The horns sound before the parley party has finished crossing back to the city gate. Stannis raises his hand once, and the column begins to spread into its siege formation, which is not the grand deployment any of them imagined when the compact was first signed in Winterfell's war room. But it is what they have. The wildlings take the eastern approach. They move into position without orders beyond the ones Jon gave that morning, and they move the way they always move, without the formations and call and response of southern armies, each man and woman making the decisions available to them and making them quickly. Jon rides their line once before he takes his own position. Ghost is already at the wall's shadow. The first exchanges are arrows and crossbow fire from the ramparts, probing rather than committed. Stannis does not press hard on the first day. He is not trying to take the city in an afternoon. He is trying to demonstrate to the people inside it that the city will be taken. Jon thinks, watching the walls in the grey late afternoon, that Val would have understood King's Landing the way she understood everything she didn't like, as a problem with a solution that cost more than it looked like it would. She had no sentiment for politics. She would have looked at those walls and said they were stone, and stone came down. And the only question was how long it took. He does not think she would have been wrong. The northern messenger reaches them on the second day of the siege. Bran has sent it from Winterfell. A raven sighted at Castle Black arrived from the Lord Commander's steward, who now holds the watch in Jon's absence. The wildlings remaining at the wall are reporting movement. Deep movement, far north of the wall, in a winter that is not natural. The shadows stretching, the silence in the animals. The steward's letter does not use the word others. The steward is careful with words, but he describes what the ranging parties see and what they do not see anymore, which is any sign of ordinary life north of the wall, and between those descriptions is a shape that Jon recognizes. He reads the letter twice, and then shows it to Stannis, who reads it once and sets it on the table. Stannis says, "Then King's Landing falls quickly, or it does not matter that it falls at all." Jon says, "Yes." Stannis looks at the letter again, then at Jon. For a moment he is very still, and Jon sees in his face something that is not fear, but is adjacent to it, the expression of a man who has spent his entire life preparing for the wrong war. "Send word north," Stannis says. "To Bran, to Sam Tarly, wherever he is. To every Maester still carrying a chain who will listen." He pauses. "And to the watch." Jon is already writing before Stannis finishes the sentence. Outside, the siege goes on. Horns and fire and the particular grinding sound of an army pressing a city that does not yet know how to give in. Robb rides the line in the smoke. The wildlings hold the eastern wall. Ghost ranges in the dark beyond the fires. The realm, in the weeks that follow, is entirely different from what it was. That is the beginning of it. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the 7 kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe